All right, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. Just give me a couple of thumbs up if you can. Very good, thank you. Welcome everyone to today's session on the topic of introduction to ISA IEC 62443 standards for OT cybersecurity. I'm very happy with the level of participation we have today, and people are still joining in. So while we still give people a minute or so, Mamouna, can you throw the question on the screen? And I'd like everybody to just quickly fill out the answer. It helps me understand I guess the background of the participants, and I can tweak the presentation based on the background. So the question is very straightforward. Which of these domains is the closest to your primary job function or primary area of expertise? Control systems, OT cybersecurity, IT security, IT other than cybersecurity, or others? All right, very good. So we'll give it a few more seconds for everybody to answer the questions. We have about 75% votes coming in. And I see that over half the folks are at least either hardcore OT security or at least control systems. A significant portion is from IT security background, which is also good. And a few folks from IT and other, which is very welcome. We would be happy to share the knowledge with everybody who is interested in this very important topic today. So you can go ahead and close the question, Mamouna. Very quick introduction of myself. My name is Mubarik Mustafa. I'm a senior consultant, OT cybersecurity consultant with over 30 years of experience, hardcore industrial automation control systems, and for the past about 10 years or so working in the OT security domain. And I have a few credentials to go with my experience, not necessarily important for today's discussion. And let's move on strictly to the topic. Because most of the folks are from OT security background, or at least have some understanding, and obviously if you're here today to learn about 62443, then I'm going to skip the next few slides because they talk about introduction to what OT cybersecurity is, and maybe the risks associated with OT cybersecurity. So just bear with me. I'm going to quickly scroll through these slides. They are less relevant. Maybe we'll have some other session regarding this. So let's move on to the topic at hand today, which is the ISA IEC 62443 standards. Obviously, we all know that these the standard itself, ISA is the International Society of Automation, and the 62443 standard is specifically for industrial control systems, cybersecurity, or OT cybersecurity. Developed by International Society of Automation. I'm sure you all know that by now. ISA 99 was the committee which was responsible for the development of this the standard. It was done in collaboration with IEC, and also in the US, it is also labeled as ANSI standard. These are just some of the the finer details. More importantly, as obvious, it is a specifically for OT cybersecurity. There are several standards, international standards on the IT security side, but the ISA 62443 is strictly for OT cybersecurity. And more importantly, what is something that a lot of people don't realize is that it is not one standard. It is a series of standards. We'll talk about that for the rest of the 30, 45 minutes or so. It is not just one standard, it is a series of standards, and it is a comprehensive framework to manage OT cybersecurity. So what are these, what is this series of standards? What I have put on the screen is basically the complete structure of the 62443 series of standard. I will spend a few minutes on this so that everybody is aligned about what the different components or the different parts of this series are. So the 62443 is, the way it has been categorized is there are four main, you can call them sections or groups. One is general, or some people call it the baseline part. There is certain section for, I would call it governance, not necessarily policies and procedures. This is how it was labeled by ACET, but obviously now it has grown over the last few years. And now I would call it more of a governance part of the 62443. Then there are some standards and that are related to systems, and we will go through this in detail about what that means. And there are some part of it which is related to components. Within each of these groups, there are multiple documents, if you may, and they're all labeled as 1-1, 1-2, 2-1, and all that. And obviously, I'm sure by now you've realized that this is the 1 part, this is the 2, this is 3, this is 4, and this is 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, 1-4, and so on and so forth. So this is how the series of standards is structured. Now, not everything that you see on the screen is a standard. Within the 62443 series, there are certain things that are called the standards themselves, or international standards. That's how ISA likes to call it. There are some that are just technical reports, and some are technical specification, minor difference between the two. As you can see that there's only one here, 62443-1-1, which is a technical specification. 2-3 is technical report. And then several others that are red marked are the actual standards. And I'm sure you've noticed by now that there are some boxes which are not labeled at all right? So let me switch the screen and show you a different picture of the same information. You can still see the same 4 groups: overview, the governance, system, and the components. The COM is, hidden. 1-1, 1-2, all those, the actual numbering is also there. It also shows what is a technical specification, which one is a TR, and which are the standards. And as you can see that there are several of them which have not been released yet. So when ISA started, ISA 99, when they started working on it, obviously they had a grand plan on how the different aspects of OT security will be addressed by the 62443 series. And they came up with the structure that we will eventually develop all of these different standards and technical specification and TRs. Some of it is a work in progress, and some of it is done. So anything that has a date or a year in front of it, those documents have been released officially. The rest is either planned or work in progress. So you can see that most of the standards, most of the documents were prepared in the previous, decade. Some as far back as 2007, the initial one, quite a few in the mid to late 2015, 18, 13, 18, 19, and 20. But this one was released last year. Actually, the initial version of 2-1 was released in 2019, but the updated one has been released last year in 2020. So if I go back to the previous one, now hopefully it'll give you a little bit better picture about what these series of standards are and how they correlate with each other. So just remember the structure that the blue ones are just the general or the common part. The green one, and this is not necessarily an official color coding, I just put it up there just to differentiate between the different groups. The green group is more focused on the governance side. The orange or yellowish color is on the system security. And then for the individual components, we have the reddish, pinkish, whatever that color is. All right, so now that we know how the standard is structured, the 1-1, 2-1, 2-3, and all that, let's deep dive a little bit into each of these individual documents. And obviously, we'll only discuss the ones that are in place. Maybe the ones that are planned, we'll briefly talk about it, what those are about, but we'll focus on the ones that have been released. And even within those, the ones that are more, I guess, relevant, at least for the beginner level discussion. So this is another view of the same standards, because in a lot of cases, people think about where all of these, what standard applies where and when. So this is the when part, in the life cycle part of the of an organization, of the industrial control system. Where does each standard where is each standard applicable? The 4-1 and 4-2, we'll talk about it in more detail. They're more about the product. So if it's a PLC or a DCS or a SCADA system, or any other component of the industrial control system, the 4- series applies to those products themselves. So obviously, this is applicable to the product security lifecycle before the product comes to market, or even if it is already in the market. The OEMs, they are encouraged and more are focusing on getting their products certified to the relevant 62443 standard. And then within the life cycle, in the timeline, comes the integration. For example, the asset owners would provide the specification for industrial control system. They would do the designing, the implementation, and the FAT and SAT and all that. And then the operation and maintenance comes into play. So where and when the different standards apply, it just gives a little bit of perspective from that point of view as well. The 3-3 is pretty much applicable throughout, but the rest of them, especially 2-1, 2-2, 2-3, 2-4, and 3-2, they are basically at the facility level once the control system is going through the design and implementation phase, or through operation and maintenance. Another way to look at it will come in later will be from the cybersecurity roles perspective. And this is probably something that you all will connect, I guess, better, because you're all coming from different backgrounds. Some of you may be asset owners, some may be product suppliers, some may be service providers, and maybe some consultants. So definition is fairly obvious that asset owners are the people who, or the organization who actually either own the plant, or the industrial facility, or the control system, or they're operating it. Product supplier are the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, the DCS vendors, the PLC vendors, the SCADA vendors, and all. Service providers could be integration service provider or the maintenance service providers, and consultants are, involved sometimes maybe in the governance and the audit and all that. So we will look at which standard is more relevant to each of these roles. So back to this picture. Now what we'll do over the next maybe 15 minutes or so, we will break down and get a very basic high-level understanding of at least the ones that have been released. We're not going to focus on the ones that are not released yet, because obviously they're not even there for us to look at. But we'll focus on what the different components are in the blue, green, orange, or reddish, pinkish shade. So let's start with the first one, the blue one. Within the blue section, which is the general section, and the way these slides are laid out, the black means they have been released. This is just to make sure that you can quickly look at it and understand that anything that is blue, written text over here, these are not released yet. So 1-1, 62443-1-1 is the only one that is released yet. And it is basically defines the terminology and concept and models. It introduces us to the concept of meaning the zoning and segmentation, maybe how the Purdue model or how ISA looks at the different levels when it comes to the hierarchy of the automation systems. So the terminology, concept, and models, this is the underlying basis. And in fact, in my opinion, anyone who wants to understand the 62443 standards must at least go through 1-1 for sure, because it gives you the baseline based on which the rest of the standards it'll help you understand what the requirements are. The other three, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because they're not released yet. They're just planned, that master glossary of terms and abbreviations, system security conformance matrix, IACS security lifecycle and use cases. These three we're not going to talk about today. So let's spend a few minutes on this 1-1, 62443-1-1. I'll just highlight a couple of things because today's session is foundational. It is just a basic introduction. We're not going to go through the whole standard or any component of it, but just to give you an idea that when we say that 62443-1-1 is about terminology, concepts, and models, these are a couple of models that some of you may have seen or may be already familiar with. Some people call it the Purdue model, but the ISA 99 committee likes to call it the reference model for ISA 99 standards. And they have defined the different levels where level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Level 0 has the process equipment under control. The basic control, the PLCs, the controllers, and the ESD systems and the SIS, they are at the level 1. And level 2 is where the supervisory control, the operator workstations, and the engineering workstations sit. The operations management is at level 3. And then the IT layer is level 4. Obviously, in between, there is a level 3.5, which is assumed as a DMZ. Keep in mind that this is not a security model. This is a reference model for the industrial control systems. A lot of people confuse this with, hey, I need to implement the cybersecurity, the Purdue model of cybersecurity. There's no such thing as Purdue model of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has its own concept from ISA perspective, the zoning and segmentation and all, and the conduits and all, but it has nothing to do with these levels. The levels are just here to identify where the individual components of the control systems reside. So this is one example of what is defined or what is explained in the 62443-1-1. Similarly, and I'm just highlighting a couple of pictures over here. This is another snapshot from the actual standard. This is the concept of zoning and zones and conduits. It describes how you segregate your facility into different zones, the plant A control zone, B control zone, and then you have these green zones for different plants, and then there's an enterprise zone. This is a cybersecurity model. This is not just a control system hierarchy. So the concept of zoning and segmentation and conduits is also described in 1-1. So the point is that it is important to go through the 62443-1-1 to be able to understand the rest of the series of standards. With that, we'll move on to the next part, the green part, which is the bulk of it, or I guess I shouldn't say bulk, but at least the most relevant for most audience, let's put it that way, is the governance. They call it policies and procedures, but we talk about it, that this is primarily the governance, the management system part of the OT security. So in this in the 2- series, there are only a few that are, there are 3 that are released. 2-1 has been released. In fact, this is the one that was originally released in 2019, and most recently, last year, the next revision has been released. And what this 2-1 talks about is, this is the bulk of it, the security program requirements for IACS asset owners. And in my personal opinion, this is probably the most relevant out of all the standards, because this talks about the actual security controls you have to put in place at the asset owner level. It is this standard describes what is required to be defined and to implement for an effective IACS cybersecurity management system. While the intended audience are primarily asset owners, but we'll see going forward, we'll talk about it, but I can just mention it here as well, that anybody and everybody, because at the end of the day, all the different other stakeholders like the OEMs and the service providers and the consultants, ultimately they all work for the end client, for the asset owners. We don't operate as consultants in silo. So if we are ultimately going to be talking to the asset owners about cybersecurity, about the OT cybersecurity, we better understand the 62443-2-1 standard. 2-2, we're not going to talk about it because it has not been released. 2-3 is not a standard. It is a technical report. And it talks about a touchy topic, and ISA intentionally decided to give so much attention to patch management in the IACS environment, a very difficult topic, a very sensitive topic as well. So ISA decided to give a separate box to it. At this time, it's just a TR. Ultimately, it will become it may become a standard as well. But for now, it is just a TR. All it does, it provides guidance. I don't have to state over here. I'm sure most of you understand the difference between guidance and the standard. The standard is something that you must comply with. If you're saying that I want to comply with 62443-2-1, you must implement all the requirements that are specified in the standard. And if you're not able to implement something, you have to provide the justification, you have to do the risk assessment and all that. But when you have something that's called a guidance, it's up to you. Maybe if you want to follow it, that's good. It's going to help you. If you don't, that's okay. Nobody's going to come after you. So 62443-2-3 provides guidance on patch management for ISCS. Now, again, the intended audience is the asset owner, because in a running plant, they're the ones who have this headache of installing patches in a running plant. But anyone else who has any responsibility to even design the patch management system. So a system integrator who is designing the overall system architecture and the control system, as well as the cybersecurity of it, they also need to understand what the guidance is regarding the patch management system, so they can design and implement a suitable program. 2-4 is something quite different. It is, while it sits in this green box, it is security program requirements for IACS service providers. So the intended target audience is not the asset owners themselves. It is targeted for the system integrators, for the maintenance providers, for consultant, anybody who is providing any kind of IACS services, any kind of automation services to any of the asset owners. This standard 2-4 specifies the requirements for them. What do they have to do to ensure that they in themselves comply with the cybersecurity requirements, or that they are also they have security controls in place to prevent any kind of supply chain risk for the asset owners. And I'll reiterate that the primary purpose of this is to address the supply chain gap of the OT cybersecurity. Because if you focus strictly on, let's say, 2-1 and the end client, the asset owners have implemented excellent security controls, and they ask a system integrator to come in and do some work for them, and system integrator in their own panel shop does all the design and integration and staging and FAT, and guess what? They don't have appropriate security controls in place. Well, there is a chance that there is a risk that some kind of either a vulnerability or a malware may get injected into the system while the system is at the service provider's facility. And ultimately, when it gets installed at the asset owner, well, guess what? The asset owner is the one that's going to be impacted by that risk. So ISA was very particular about dedicating a complete standard for those integrators and service providers on what they need to do at their end if they are to provide any kind of automation services to any asset owners. So 2-1 standard for the asset owners and 2-4 for service providers. So just remember these two as the important ones. And obviously anybody who is interested in patch management can look at the guidance here as well. I'll just briefly touch the 2-1 because more importantly, because this was released just last year. The previous version was quite different in terms of the structure and the content. And ISA did a major overhaul when they transitioned from the 2019 version to 2024 version. As I said before, this is primarily for the asset owners, but also useful for service providers, GRC personnel, and anybody else who has anything to do with OT security. what it does is this standard provides the asset owners with a framework to develop and evolve their security program. All right. It focuses on establishing the security program itself and then defining and achieving different maturity levels of the security program. And obviously, you can see on the right that it not only talks about the technology part of it, that thou shall have the antivirus software. I'm just saying it. It doesn't state it like that. But people think that the standards talk about, hey, you will install the antivirus and you will install the firewall and all those things. But that's not what the standard is about. It focuses on the complete security program, establishing a security program that focuses on all three legs of cybersecurity: the people, the process, and the technology part. And it provides the requirement on how to define the maturity level of different security controls and how to increase the maturity level. So let's look at a little bit more detail into this maturity level part, what this means, and we'll have a little bit of a view of the security program elements as well. So ISA, basically, it has taken the concept of maturity level from CMMI, which is an established maturity model for defining the requirements of maturity levels as well as to track the level of implementation. We're not going to read this whole thing, but it just gives you an idea that for every process, for every program element that you put in place, it could be something initial. So the organization's maturity level, the asset owner's maturity level could be at the initial level, which means that that whatever they do, they perform in an ad hoc manner and often undocumented or not fully documented manner. In most cases, in a lot of cases, I shouldn't say most, but in a lot of cases, when I go to a client as a consultant, this is where I find them. So I ask them, hey, do you take backups of your, I don't know, PLC application? Oh, yes, we do. Okay, where is the process documented? We don't have a documented process. Okay, so how often do you take the backup? Well, I mean, we take it frequently. Okay, where have you defined how often you will take the backup? We haven't really documented it, but we rely, my engineer is very good and he does it quite frequently. This is the initial level, the base level, where things are happening at a very ad hoc level, and in most cases, undocumented or not properly planned, not properly designed. In a managed or level 2 maturity, you would have, it is pretty much the same as initial, with the exception that there is some level of documentation. Okay, documentation exists that describes how to manage the delivery and performance of the capability. We will take backups of this particular PLC application from the engineering workstation once a month. Okay, is it documented somewhere? Somebody has signed the document? Yes. The documentation can be in the form of a written procedure or written training program or anything, but still, the document is in place, but the practice, the following it is still a little bit not repeatable. Okay. At the defined and practice level, the models are fundamentally the same, with the exception that the execution-related aspects of the CMMI are included here. Therefore, a process at level 3 is a level 2 process that is being practiced on the ISCS. So it's not just documented. It can be shown that, okay, we have evidence that we do take backup every month. We have documented that we'll take the backup every month, and we have evidence that we are taking the backup every month. It is repeatable, not just once, not just twice, but over time within the ISCS. And then there is the improving or optimizing level. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm sure you all can read about it in your spare time. But this is what the ISA 62443-2-1 has decided to follow. Now, where is this applied, this maturity level applied? It is applied at all the levels of the security requirements. So the 62443-2-1, it talks about SPE, security program elements, which are, these are the elements of security program. This is from the actual standard. So they have a security program element for organization security measures. for configuration management, network and communication security, component security, et cetera, And within each group, they have these subgroups, element groups that, for example, in case of network and communication, there's net one for system segmentation, and another one for wireless access, another one for remote access. And within each of these element groups, you have the actual security controls. I'll show you the example of that. I think I picked element group users. So if I go back over here, this one, let's go deep dive into this particular SPE6 for user access control, which has two groups. User one group is called identification and authentication, and the next group is authorization and access control. Within each of these, there are actual security elements. So user 1.1 is user identity and assignment, and then I didn't sort it correctly. 1.2 would be user identity removal. There's a complete requirement on how this should be done. User identity persistence, how this should be done. So each of these elements, there's a detailed requirement associated with it that you need to comply with if you want to implement the complete security program. And within each of these requirements, you have to have those 4 levels of maturity levels. So for example, user identity assignment. How do you assign users? How do you assign access to user? Well, my engineer, he's very smart, and he looks at the need of the person asking, and then he assigns appropriate level. That is, you're at level 1, maturity level 1. You're doing it ad hoc. It's not documented. It's not repeatable. So this is middle 1. Let's say that you document, oh, there is a form that every new person has to fill out the form, and then the form has to be approved. It is at least the process is documented for user identity assignment. Then you're at middle 2. And then if you can show me the evidence that, yes, that process is followed repeatable month after month, user after user, then you'll be at level 3. So I'll leave the standard here because in the interest of time, 2-1 is the most relevant for the asset owners because it defines all the different security program elements and the requirements that they must implement to achieve compliance with the 62443 2-1 and to achieve the different levels of maturity within their organization for the standard. Let's move on to the next level. So we have covered the 1- series, the 2- series. Now let's talk about the 3-. Now it's going to become a little bit more complicated. 2-1 kind of requirements, it is still relatively easier for people to understand because it literally said, hey, you know, you have to have a user access identity and all those things. But 3-1 is slightly more involved. The two standards that are released are 3-2 and 3-3. So we'll talk about those two for the next maybe 5 minutes or so. We'll skip this one. The first one, the blue one, is not released. 3-2 is security risk assessment for system design. So when you're designing a system, let's say a system integrator or service provider, or let's say the big OEMs, when they're doing the IACS system design, at that time, they need to perform certain risk assessment on the system design itself. And then based on the output of the risk assessment, they will create zoning and conduit model, and then the target security levels. And these will be documented as the cybersecurity requirements, and then these will be implemented as part of the project. So in most cases, it's, well, let's put it this way. It seems that this applies more to greenfield projects, to new projects, because if it's a new facility being installed, you know, you give the project to a system integrator, they have to follow the 3-2 requirements to do a risk assessment of the system design itself so that they can design the system with security considerations in mind. If you are like me, and especially if you're as old as me, in my time, in my childhood, let's not say childhood, I'm not that old, but in my early time when I used to implement DCS, PLC, SCADA systems, my biggest challenge used to be, hey, let's just make it work. Cybersecurity, I had never even heard the word about it. Let's just install it, and OPC, oh, let's just give a password blank. Admin, make it work. Segmentation, what is it? Just put the network together, make it work and all that. So now, with all the risks that we have associated with cybersecurity, we need to have risk assessment of the design itself to make sure that we are taking into consideration the requirements of, let's say, zoning and segmentation, or the target security level, or the security controls that should be implemented to protect the system. So this is what 3-2 is about. 3-3 is primarily about system security requirements and security level. Let's move on to the next slide. We'll give more detail. I'll skip this one. This is just a picture from the 3-2 standard on how the risk assessment is done. What are the different steps? You identify the system under consideration, you perform initial risk assessment, and then you partition into zone and conduits, and then you do this and you do this. So there is a very systematic step-by-step process you need to follow to do the risk assessment on the system design. On the 3-3 part, it's primarily about, and I'll just look at this one, it is more on the foundational requirements for the system security. There is some level of overlap with 2-1 over here. Remember I said that the previous version of 2-1 was quite different from the current one. For example, we actually looked at the user access just as an example, while 3-3 also talks about user control. So there are some security controls that are defined here as well for system security. Keep in mind that 2-1 is much broader. It is not just the system, not just the technology. It's about people, process, and technology, and the governance, and the security program, and the management system. 3-3 focuses strictly on the system security requirement, and it has these FR foundational requirements, and under each of these, there are certain requirements that you have to take care of. I'll leave it at that, because today we're just looking at the high level what each of these mean. Quickly moving on to the last part of these boxes, the reddish pinkish color, component security, or the 62443 standards for components. Both these standards have been released. I think there's a little bit of a delay. Yeah, you see the screen now. Both of these standards have been released, so they're in black. The first one is about product security development lifecycle requirements. So this is again for the OEMs, for the companies who make the PLCs and the SCADA and the DCS, for them that for their lifecycle requirement, what are the product security development requirement? They describe, this standard describes the requirements for a product developer security development lifecycle, not for the asset owner, not for the system integrator, but the OEMs who make the PLCs. All right, so the principal audience includes suppliers of control systems and component products. Similarly, 4-2 is also focused on the OEMs because it talks about the technical security requirements for the IACS components. It describes what security controls have to be built into the PLCs itself. Like, you know, if you have seen the PLCs that I've seen, the good old ones, password, what is it? So the PLC doesn't even support the password. Obviously, most communication protocols used to be unsecured, unencrypted, and all that. So now, after this requirements, the components, including embedded devices, host devices, network devices, software applications, they have to have certain security features in place for them to be certified by 62443-4-2 standard. So once again, the principal audience includes suppliers of component products that are used in control systems. In most cases, I don't know how many of you are from the I guess, suppliers background, but most modern suppliers, most leading suppliers nowadays, they at least conform to the requirements of 62443-4-1 and 4-2. And in a lot of cases, they even get their products certified to these standards. So now that we have looked at the different boxes, the actual standards within the program, I'll quickly summarize this, and hopefully those of you who are from different backgrounds, they'll be able to connect with it. Asset owners, anyone who's with the asset owners, for sure, you have to go through 1-1. And obviously 2-1 is for you all, so you have to read it and learn it and comply with it. Patch management is the biggest pain for you, so you better understand what this is. And of course, the risk assessment and system design 3-2 is also something that is important for you, because when you are making the RFP for the project, you have to put in all the requirements for the integrator or the project contractor, what security controls you want, what type of system design requirements you need in your project. If you are integration service providers, of course, 1-1 is a given. You need to basically certify yourself, or at least comply with the requirements of 2-4, so that you are taking care of the supply chain risk in the overall OT cybersecurity. I think something that I'm missing over here, I'll change that. The next one is you should also read 2-1. Without 2-1, I don't think, because you're doing project for the end client, for the asset owner. And if you don't know what 2-1 asks for, how are you going to build the security controls in place? If you are a maintenance service provider, similarly, 1-1, 2-3, you're going to be doing the patching. If you're a maintenance provider, you will be the one doing the patching on the control system. So you should understand what the guidance is for this TR. And of course, you should also comply with the requirements of 2-4. And definitely, I would add 2-1 over here. If you're a product supplier, then obviously your main goal is to build those security features in your products itself, so that you can get your product certified by ISA for compliance with 4-1 and 4-2. And again, I would say 2-1 is like a Bible. You must read this, or you must at least understand what 2-1 says. So here are the key takeaways from this discussion. Obviously, we all know ISA 62443 is the, and I would like to emphasize, the leading industry standard for OT cybersecurity. It is, in my opinion, a must for the asset owner, personnel responsible for OT security, service providers, product suppliers, IT personnel. Even if you don't have anything to do directly with OT security, IT personnel who work in industrial organizations, in oil and gas, and refineries, petrochemical, electrical power, and all that. It's important for you to understand the requirements of OT security of 62443, because you're going to be dealing with folks. If you go, I'm sure those of you coming from IT background, you go talk to the control system engineer and say, hey, I'm going to come in and shut down your switch because I need to upgrade the firmware. And guess what he's going to say? So it's good for you to understand the requirements, so that you can at least speak the same language as the control systems folks. A little bit of a, not a warning, but caution, and I'm sure by now, over the past 30 minutes or so, you must have realized that these are quite complex. They are quite comprehensive, but also quite complex. Just remembering, and I've been working with these standards for God knows 10 years now, maybe more than that. And even I sometimes forget which one is a I guess a TR, which one is TS, and okay, this standard. So it's quite comprehensive and quite complex. So it requires your significant efforts to learn and understand. You're not gonna just, read through it once and say, okay, I know all the requirements of the standard. You're gonna have to go through them again and again and deep dive into them and understand what the requirements are and how to implement them. Here's a big constraint. These standards are not free. ISA charges for these standards. So you're not going to be able to download from the internet. I'm sure there is some place for where you can find the bootleg copies, but I would strongly discourage you from doing that. The standards themselves are quite expensive, but here's the good news. If you become an ISA member, you get access to all these standards for free. For your own personal reference, only viewing. You cannot download, you cannot print, but if you want to read it on the computer, get ISA membership. It's nominal in terms of the amount for the per year cost, and it gives you free access to most of these standards in view only at the isa.org website. But if any one of you is trying to build your career into OT security, invest in yourself, please, or get your company to invest in you if they're supportive. Because anyone who's working in OT cybersecurity domain, in my opinion, whether you implement 62443 or not, you must understand the requirements, because it gives you that strong basis based on which you can build your career. And if nothing else, at least when you're talking to somebody, they would understand that you know what you're talking about. And ideally, get trained and certified if you can do that. ISA 62443 offers these trainings. ISA offers these trainings for 62443 standards. There are 4 courses: IC 32, 33, 34, and 37. These can be taken in person or online, self-paced and all that. I highly recommend that you take these courses. Quite expensive, but still, if anybody wants to invest in themselves, in their career, you should do that. ISA also offers certification in addition to the training. If you pass, there are 4 separate exams. If you pass this exam, you become the fundamental specialist. If you pass this exam, you become the risk assessment specialist, design specialist. And if you pass all these 4, they give you a very nice badge of cybersecurity expert. There's no separate exam for this. If you pass the first 4, you will get the badge. Keep in mind, you cannot take the exams on your own. Hey, let me just get my friend to help me with the studies and I'll take the exam. ISA requires you to take the course first, and then you're eligible to take the exam. All right, so I'll leave it at that. Questions, if you have any, please feel free to ask. And let me see if I can switch my screen so I can see some of the questions. So I have a few raised hands. Maimuna, I don't see the questions, so you're gonna have to help me out if there are any questions coming in.
Yeah, there are a handful of questions. You could see a question for box at the top right corner with the symbol on it.
No,
please use the
not
screen
seeing
through
it.
which.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I'm not seeing it, so you're gonna have to read it.
Okay. So
Or
there
make
is
me
a
the
first
organizer
question
when
that
we're doing
says,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead.
sure. Let me do that. Yes. So, are you able to?
I can see the questions now. So I'll try and make it quick. It says, where'd it go? Some questions are regarding the certificates and all that. I'll let Maimuna take care of them later. Should IC 62443 be updated because of new technologies coming on, such as IIoT and AI? Absolutely. And it is happening. ISA works, ISA 99 works very, diligently to make sure that they can consider all the newer technologies. There is a lot of work done on IIoT. It's not part of the standards yet. AI, for sure, they are working on it. But obviously, these people who make these standards are volunteers. It's not a paid thing. They're all industry individuals like you and I, and they all have to spare time to work on the standards. So soon you will see these things coming. We're gonna find the updates in the new edition of 62442-1 fundamentally change the nature of the required security controls for IACS asset owner to address new cybersecurity vulnerabilities, or do they primarily refine the? I think it's primarily refining of the framework. So it's not like they're asking for you to do something totally different from let's say the previous version, but they've just structured it differently. So inherently, the core contents, the core concept is still the same. The way it is laid out is slightly different. I'll take a couple more and try to finish on time. What is the best way to get the documents of IEC 62443? I just told you, get a membership of ISA, and you will be able to view the standards for free for yourself. So if 1-2 to 4 not released, so it's not implemented on the industry in general. Yes, obviously. I mean, those standards that are not released yet, those address certain part of the requirements, but if you focus strictly on 2-1, I think that you'll be good. If you're not, in most cases, unless you're an OEM equipment manufacturer or service provider, if you fully understand 2-1, you will be able to cover the bulk of it. Obviously, the risk assessment part is a very specialized exercise. You will still need somebody who understands risk assessment, but 2-1 is something definitely, I would say, look for it. Is there a free sheet available to requiring all? Is there a free sheet available for referring to all the detailed requirements under such standard? Obviously, because the standard itself is not free, even if somebody has made those sheets for themselves, they're not allowed to share it with everybody. So my answer is no. Similar to ISO 27001, is there a mandate for ICS OT environment organization to follow 62443-2-1 and evidence? Very good question. So and obviously these are not government regulations. When you say mandate is not, even 27001 is not a mandate. The ISO doesn't ask that every company shall comply with this, but so it's not a regulation. 62443 is not a regulation either. But if somebody wants to, if an asset owner wants to protect their industrial control systems, well, 62443 is probably one of the, I guess, leading standards. There are some national standards like within Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, even in the US, you have the NERC and all that. There are some national standards, but a lot of those also refer to 62443. And they, in fact, in some cases, just pretty much it's the same standard written differently. So it's not mandated, but you better do it if you're an asset owner. Can most of these policies be already defined by information security policies, or do you need a separate one for OT for compliance? Excellent question. I've talked about it in some of my other sessions, but I caution people, don't copy paste IT into OT security, no. But also don't throw it away. Let's not become yes or no. That no, we're not going to have IT securities in OT. No, that's not right either. Or no, we'll just copy IT security into OT. That's not good either. Leverage what you have within the IT security, understand what the OT specific requirements are, the constraints are, and then tweak the IT security policies to match the OT. At the end of the day, you will end up making at least, even if it's you start from the IT part, if you make a replica, you will end up making separate policies and procedures for the OT environment. Another question, maturity level is defined for each system or for the entire organization. How is the differentiation made between MIL 3 and 4? In other words, how do you establish compliance to MIL 4? I think that 3 and 4 will maybe have a separate session on the maturity levels, but the definition of maturity level is at the organization level, in my opinion, because it's the maturity of the organization that if you have the same requirement of, let's say, updating the antivirus once a month, if it is documented how often you will do it, and the whole organization in general is following it, if it's repeatable, you're already at MIL 3. If half the organization does it and half doesn't do it, you're at MIL 2. So the maturity is at the organization level, in my opinion. I'm trying to find one more question that I can quickly address. Which series is primarily relevant for someone doing an external audit assessment? I would say 2-1, because that's the one. 2-1 defines the security controls to be implemented. So when you go in as an auditor, you say, hey, have you documented what you will do? And the asset owner says, yes, here's the document. Here's the documented security controls, the policies, the procedures. And then you audit them based on what is documented. If they comply with the documentation, if they have the evidence, you give them good marks. So I would still say 2-1 is the way to go for that. I'll leave it at that because it's almost end of time. There's a lot of questions. I'll be happy to maybe connect some other time, but thank you very much for your very active participation. Over to you, Maimuna.
Thank you, Mubarik. It was very informational session, and I hope everyone has enjoyed it as much as I have. A quick note for everyone: we will be hosting an extended version of this Understanding ISA 62443 course in the coming future. Please keep an eye in your inbox, and you'll receive an email from ICE Insider, ice4ot.com, and in addition to that, there will be few information which we'll be sharing to you tomorrow as well. So I will highly recommend to stay and attend both days. Now I would like to invite Shiv Kataria. Over to you, Shiv. Shiv, can you hear me?
Yeah, Mona. Just a second, I'm just turning on the stuff.
Yeah, let me know if you are able to share your screen.
Okay.
Is it working for you?
Yeah,
Perfect.
it's working. Just hope it's visible.
Yeah, good to go.
All right. Thanks. So very good evening, everyone, and thanks, Mustafa, for setting up the ground for a risk assessment discussion. And this would primarily be based on IC 62443. We will be discussing a bit on why do we need risk assessment as such, and then we would be primarily using IC 62443 as a primary standard for doing risk assessment in ICS environment. So those of you who don't know me, I have around 16 years of experience in cybersecurity. I hold a bunch of certification, and one of them is also IEC 62443 cybersecurity expert. And I post a lot of OT security stuff on my LinkedIn account as well as the OT security Huddle platform on LinkedIn. Now, without further ado, let's dig into the agenda. So we'll start with why do we really need to start with the risk. Then we'll see the few of the standards which are available to us. We'll get into the cybersecurity lifecycle according to IEC 62443 standard itself. A quick view on the Johnson conduits, and then we will see how the process actually is for doing the risk assessment in ICS. At the end, we'll have some questions from the participants. I try to answer your queries, so do post your questions throughout the session. I'll try to address them at the end. Okay, so yeah, the question is, why do you really need to start with the risk first? We typically actually hear that every year, lot many reports do come, and they show that the threat landscape for OT is continuously growing. At the same time, the customers or the asset owner, they have the challenge on limited downtime that they can take. There are also safety requirements that they cannot bypass. If something needs to be stopped, they need to take a lot many permissions, and then generally those updates are primarily the change management process. And change also requires a due risk assessment to be done. Due to the longer life cycle of the assets, we need to take care of all those changes which we are going to introduce. And also, we cannot have off-the-shelf security. Like we can choose kind of system uh, because each environment is very, very heterogeneous. And in these heterogeneous environment, we have budget constraint, and also the effort and expertise required is also different. So we want to balance this out so that we understand what are the most critical assets for us and what will go wrong if we don't going to address those things, which allow us to have a continuity of operation and also ensure safety of the people who are working at the plant. So IC 62443, you guys have just now heard of. It's the one of the standard that advocates risk assessment as the core of the entire series of documents and the standards in 62443, and that's what we're going to see. But before that, this year lot many reports like every year has come, and we see that the risks are increasing, and ransomware being the one of the most high volume threat to ICS is getting increased. Drago's report has actually shown that close to 1,700 new ransomware attacks have been identified in 2024 itself, which is almost 87% increase compared to last year. Lot many pre-ransomware warnings are also issued by organizations like CISA in US, and we see that the exposure warnings that are given by these agencies, they predict the possibility of the industrial infrastructure also being targeted by these adversaries or the threat groups. Other reports like IBM exports, it has also shown that the valid account and public facing vulnerabilities are generally the one which are exploited for initial attack vector into industrial infrastructure. So that's also one of the reasons that we should understand what is there and what is the risk that the organization would be sitting on. The report, as I mentioned, it shows that most of the organizations who are targeted are either manufacturing or the energy sectors being the most juicy target for the attackers. So it makes one more motivation for us to focus on the risk assessment for the entities. This kind of summarizes the challenges on the security side. And in the previous session also, you have seen a tinge of this, that we have challenge of life cycle. If we don't understand the risk, it becomes very difficult to manage the asset, which has very big life cycle of 10 to 25 years. We don't have generally the software refresh available to us. So it makes sense that we understand the risk and we address through other possible mechanism, because most possibly you will have infrastructure which is already obsolete. You don't have updates available. Windows 7, for example. Windows 10, for example, is already now, I think in this month, they will stop supporting Windows 10 also. But in industrial environment, most of you would have seen that we have XPs, Windows 7, Windows Vista, Windows 8, 10, all the variants. So we also need another way to basically protect these legacy assets, which are generally sitting on weak points or vulnerabilities, which might get exploited. Then we have the protection concept, or let's say the ICS environment being heterogeneous. You cannot have one solution fitting all. You really need to have a tailor-made solution that addresses the risk and the security requirement for your infrastructure. This paramodel is a very customary one, and most of the OT discussion starts with this. But just one reference here, that it is not a security model. It helps us understand the functional classification of ICS at the factory floor, like what is running on the ground, what kind of process it is. Is it a batch process, continuous process, or discrete process? What kind of combination of these assets you can do? How do you make a scope identification based on these assets and the devices sitting out there? There is also different versions of this, like people can expand it. Like one of this architecture is also circulates very widely on different OT security discussions. This one I taken from a book by Pascal Ackerman, that there is also a buffer zone between your IT and OT, which requires to be having a good amount of focus when you are designing your risk assessment or cybersecurity requirement specifications. So yeah, kind of summarizes or gives a perspective that how these devices are connected and how they will be trying to connect to the external world. Whatever is below the DMG is generally the area of OT, and whatever is above the DMG is the primary, generally the responsibility of the IT teams or the IT applications like your ERPs, your email server, so on and so forth. So to do the risk assessment, there are good standards available for us, and these standards keep us honest in terms of, how do you do systematically identification of the weakness in your system, the threats that might come to your system, and also uh, understanding of the consequence, impact, the exposure, all sorts of things. So IC 62443 we have just now seen in very depth, and for risk assessment, uh, we will use generally 2-1, which is policy procedure part, a specific standard 3-2, which in previous session you have seen this one workflow. I'm also going to give a little bit more detail on that workflow. And then we can also use the component specific standards 4-1, 4-2 as well. NIST also have a guideline based on the NIST CSF framework itself. It has ICS specific control and architecture. It's a very, very wonderful guide. And since you know in the previous session we have mentioned that the 62443 standard is not available for free. If you are a member of ISA, you can access it. Few of them, not all the documents. But NIST could become a good starting document for you. It's a free guideline. It gives multiple different architectures available to you. You can go and then review those architectures, how this infrastructure looks like, what is a central SCADA, what is a distributed SCADA, what is an IoT-based system, what is a pharmaceutical ICS looks like, so on and so forth. Also, CISA also, generally advises the cross-sector performance goal, which are based on, again, the NIST cybersecurity framework. And these cross-sector performance goals are helpful for us to decide, like, where should I invest immediately on cybersecurity, which will give us quick wins and reduce our risk significantly. So I will also encourage you to go to this NIST website, CISA website, and then see these CPZs, review them. We need to identify the risk, what are the possible risk items, and then we can use the IEC 62443 standard to see what are the security requirements we could actually implement to reduce the risk, build the overall control framework, and then gather evidence of whether these controls are working or not working. That's the general idea of risk assessment and risk management in ICS. But yeah, in the next slides, we will discuss how does we can actually achieve that systematically with a quick example of risk assessment as well. You've seen the previous 62443 series diagram. And I use this diagram because it tells the current status of the document. It's a living document. Continuously, multiple different sections of this documents are getting revised, getting added. So in the previous, you have seen only till 1-4, but there is also 1-5, which is already released a couple of years ago. And then currently 1-6 is going to be released. Somebody has asked the question in previous session that whether we should update this standard for the changing landscape of technology. So yeah, 1-6 is towards that direction. It will talk about implementing 62443 for IIoT applications, having sensors in the field, then you have brokers in between, and then you have cloud connectivity. How do you use same conceptual model to implement on such architecture? Then we have the policy procedure tier, where we have different sections, only 2-1, 2-2, and 2-4 are in the release stage. 2-3 is now under revision already, and it might come out soon, maybe by beginning of next year. So the new additions are the profile tier and the evaluation tier. So in profile tier is only announced, and 1-5 in the general tier talks about what would be there in the profile tier. So this 1-5 talks about what is going to be here in this section. 6-1 is for evaluation. Somebody might say that, okay, I have 2-4 compliance, and somebody might say, yeah, my product is compliant to 4-2. So these two specific documents, which are technical specification, not standard, that talks about how do you really evaluate their claims for your satisfaction. Okay, So yeah, these are the 6 tiers. We have already gone through 4 of them. And the new development is profile tier and evaluation tier. So yeah, initially when you look at the standard, it might feel overwhelming, but yeah, trust me, there is a method for this madness to handle and then understand the overall architecture of the documents. 3 different ways you can access this standard. You can be an ISA member and then you get free access to the standard parts. Then you can purchase the standard. Of course, each document generally costs around 200 to 250 euros or dollars. And then if you officially attend ISA training, then they might give you few documents. Generally, they give 1-1, 2-1, and 3-3 in the official training, IC 30, 132, 32, 33, 34, and 37. Sorry. So how do the life cycle looks like? First, always we start with assessment, where we do risk assessment, identify what are the assets that we want to protect. And our goal here is that we define what kind of security we really want to implement in our infrastructure. You cannot have the highest level of security available everywhere. It's not like a single, uh, you know, a policy that you could implement across the entire organization. You need to understand what kind of risk that they are having. It's not like your corporate IT laptop that all the laptops will have similar level of security being pushed by the GPOs and the central IT managers. You need to have a different understanding here. What are the safety requirement? What are the process hazards? What are the essential functions which might get hampered due to security implementation? The standards calls out all of these essential function in 3-3 section of the standard itself, and we need to understand them before we decide the cybersecurity. So this technical side of the 62443 is governed by security levels. You've seen the policy procedure governance is governed by the maturity levels, but the technical implementation is through security levels, and your desired security level is security level target. So as an outcome of your risk assessment exercise, you will always want that you achieve what is your target. Based on the target specifications, you design the security countermeasure, and then you implement those security countermeasures. And then comes the third phase, that whatever you have implemented, you want to see whether that implementation is current or it's getting downgraded. It could downgrade due to new vulnerabilities, new weaknesses, new threats, new system introduction, new changes introduced. So you always want that your security level that you have achieved is either equal to or higher than your security level target. What is achieved is post implementation, you go and then check what is the status of your cybersecurity. So this is the life cycle of cybersecurity with your cybersecurity governance 2-1 part, giving you guidelines on policy, procedure, trainings, awareness of the people. We start with the high level risk assessment. This high level risk assessment could be for the entire system itself. Like we need to start with one zone at a time or one system at a time. You could say that I start with the substation, I start with my boiler management system, I start with the maybe with the SCADA itself, and then you do the risk assessment. If your risk here is not under your toleration or tolerable limit, then you go and then do allocation of zones and conduits, which is putting the system into smaller pieces or smaller scopes based on what kind of criticality and the other criteria you might have for the system. Then you do detailed risk assessment, which is each of the asset, each of the item needs to be assessed what kind of risk that they might pose. It could be your application running into a Windows environment, or the Windows itself, or a PLC, an RTU, an IED, your SCADA system, or it could be your VPN terminator, your DMZ, anything of that sort. So we go and then assess each one of them, identify the possible threats against them, and then see the weaknesses that might get exploited over there. With this, we come up with something called a cybersecurity requirement specification, CRS. It's actually discussed in 3-2 part of the standard. Post the CRS, we design and engineer the security. Like your outcome might say that you need to improve your access control mechanism. And then what would you design? You design a network that allows to connect your devices through Active Directory domain controller, as well as possibly the radius-based authentication for your IDs, your RTUs, and your network infrastructures. That is what you are going to design. And then you will implement through installation, commissioning, validation of the security. Finally, in the maintenance phase, you see that, okay, cybersecurity is continuously monitored, and you have a change management procedure, you have incident recovery procedure, and then you have also an auditing procedure throughout these three different phases, and then continuously review and update these processes as such. Security levels are generally are 5. They start from level 0 to level 4. Level 0 means there is no security. Level 1 is your security against your insider or coincidental violation that people might do. For example, if you fear that, okay, we don't want to keep our systems open, our systems are air gapped, our systems are very close, very limited automation functionality, but we don't want people accidentally make a mistake. So you put a username and password, and the username and password is shared by multiple different people who are working for production. Then it goes to level 2, which is protecting your system with kind of skills which are specialized for attacking the system, like professional hackers. And if you want to implement a security through for professional hacker group coming together and then targeting much more sophistication, much more knowledge, much more resources, then you go to security level 3. And then if you are really looking for protecting your infrastructure against nation state kind of attackers, then you go security level 4. And how does this will be implemented? You could think of the same access control example. If you want security level 1, you would create a username and a password. 5 of your operation engineers will use the same username, same password. They will access the system. When you go to security level 2, you will have each one of them having their own credentials, individual username, individual password. If you go to security level 3, then you would say that, okay, inside if they are accessing the system, then it's okay. But if they are trying to accessing the system remotely over, let's say, the RDP connection, then we would require two factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. Security level 4 says that all the assets in your ICS would require multi-factor authentication. So implement such a technology that would allow two-factor authentication would be very costly, and it's not necessarily required everywhere. The same essential function requirement also goes in here, like your PLC, which is controlling your safety system, is a very critical asset, and it might require immediate access during the time of incident. So you would never would like to put a multi-factor authentication or complex password. So all of these security requirements need to be assessed through a risk assessment procedure and then implemented accordingly. 3 different types of security levels. Those 0 to 4, you can interpret them as security level target, which is your desired security level. And if a device is saying that, okay, I am capable of supporting this much, then it is called capability security level. So if an OEM is providing a system, they will say SLC. If you are an asset owner of what you want, it will become security level target for you. And post the assessment and audit, whatever is gained is called achieved security level. So that's why the formula of cybersecurity lifecycle saying that your achieved security level should either be higher or equal to your security level target. You see in this foundational requirement also, and why these are there is because generally the goal of cybersecurity is to ensure your systems are available, they are functioning the way they are supposed to function, and then they also protect the information not to be shared to the people which are not authorized to access. These are the 3 different goals, apart from the safety being another one in ICS. To put a granularity and the auditability, these 4 different goals of safety, availability, integrity, and confidentiality, they are put up into 7 foundational requirements, and these are the pillars of cybersecurity according to ISO 62443, They are applicable for system level security, also for product level security. And products could be your PLCs, your switches, it could be your operating system, it could be your SCADA application, so on and so forth. Quickly about security zones and conduit, you have seen one of the architecture previously, but whenever we are doing risk assessment, it becomes necessary for us to put a boundary on what are the area you are doing the risk assessment on. And security zones supports that through logical grouping of assets based on the physical location, based on the information that they are processing, based on the applications are hosted, and also maybe possibly based on the common security goals. These could be your logical divisions within your ICS, like there is only one system, substation. Within the substation, you would have one as a, a zone that supports your Bay Area, another zone which could be supporting your DMG. Maybe there could be another zone that is supporting your control center level. So these kind of different possibilities that could be there. Each of these zones typically would be a distinct area or level of trust, and based on that level of trust only, we are going to calculate our security level target and do the risk assessment. Typical examples are manufacturing zone, control zone, enterprise zone, and DMG. They also possibly would coincide here with the Purdue model that you have seen, but Purdue model is not a security model. It could, of course, support you in understanding the asset logically into your ICS environment. With zones, there is also a related thing, which is conduit. Conduits are basically your network pipes, which supports communication between two different zones. And you would typically have wiring, router, firewalls, network management devices sitting into it. These are the typical examples of, different systems and possible zones that you could create. If there is a SCADA zone like this, there could be an enterprise network. It could become one zone. Then there is a plant zone, which you are seeing in green. And below the plant zone, there could be a control zone. And you could see that these two different zones are connected through a conduit. At the top tier, there is a network connectivity through this router. In the bottom tier, you see there is a firewall, which is sitting in between. So these are basically the logical grouping of the assets which are designed to function for a specific ICS requirement. The other example is typical example of your grid. You can see these control zone A, B, C as substations. And then these are connected through a SCADA network through WAN to control centers where these substations are controlled. And above there is also enterprise zone, which is connecting the entire infrastructure. So each of these substation would become a specific zone with RTU, PLC, local HMI, and network devices. And the risk assessment would be done for that limited scope, not for the entire system in one go. And then you would define the security level target for each of these specific substation. But a question might come up in your mind that, okay, I have site A and site B control zones, and both the sites are similar. Then why do we need to do two separate risk assessment? Because the technology provider for site A could be one company, like let's say Siemens, and the other system could be from another company, let's say Schneider. Both of them might have different technology, different protocols running, and each of these sites might have a different weaknesses, threats applicable to this system. So you need to select possibly the substations which are of similar or same identical, and then you could group, okay, I have 10 different substations from Siemens. I'll assess one of them and then possibly will implement the same level of security. But here also you might have a challenge. If the two substations from the same OEM are having two different generations, you need to consider them separately at each of the generation. The system which is commissioned with Ciprotec 4 relay versus a system that is commissioned with Ciprotec 5 relay, each of them will have a different cybersecurity risk, and you need to assess them separately. This is an example of conduit. The enterprise network is connecting through your plant A, B, and C, and then another conduit here is this part, which is your plant zone connecting to your control zone through a firewall. So these are basically the model that you need to build before you are proceeding with the risk assessment process. Now the question is, what is risk and the risk assessment? Risk is a function of the threat multiplied by vulnerability and the consequence, which is an outcome of a threat getting materialized due to a weakness in your system. And then the possible consequence, the consequence could be a safety consequence, there could be financial consequence, there could be your reputational consequence, and there could also be environmental consequence. And within these consequence scale, there could also be the varied level of impact, like safety could have an impact of somebody only getting hurt and require only first aid, to possibly the impact that causes multiple different casualty. So we need to actually have that understanding available to us before we proceed with the risk assessment process. So in theory, it is basically expectation of loss expressed in probability that a particular threat will exploit a particular vulnerability with a particular consequence. You could think of a scenario that there is a particular software being run into a power plant, and this software has a non-vulnerability availability, which is not yet patched. And then you came to know that there is a specific adversary group targeting the same vulnerability, which is having a new type of malware that will try to get into the system and then exploit the same vulnerability. So it becomes important that previously you knew that there is a vulnerability, but there might possibly no malware or exploit available. You would simply document that vulnerability, but now it could be something that could convert into a risk, causing shutdown of the plant itself. So we need to identify what would that be, and once this malware gets into system, what are the other activities this malware can do, whether it will impact one system in the plant or it might impact the entire location, or would it also have capability to do lateral infection into the plant as well. So that's what we want to do with risk assessment. 62443 is a very, very beautiful standard, a series of documents. It tells that you do risk assessment, but it doesn't tell that, okay, you need to do only with the way that it is prescribed in the 3-2 part of the standard. It says that you could use any other framework, any other type. You could create your own framework to doing this. So there are documents available like ISO 27005, there is NIST 830 guideline freely available. There is also ISO 31010, the risk management and risk assessment techniques, apart from 62443 3-2, which is part of the series of 62443 standard itself. Before jumping into risk assessment, you require to gather system under consideration, and that's why we are doing the Joan conduit model, understanding the system. But sitting far away from the system, you would never know that. You need something as a documentary evidence. And what are those documents? These are your asset inventory into a possibly a spreadsheet, which tells what kind of asset you are having. Then you require system architecture diagram, how these systems are connected to each other. Similarly, like what we are seeing in few slides back when we are seeing Joan and conduit model, a zoomed out version of that one, which much more details about the system. The network diagram, the IP addresses, what systems are connected to what, where is the firewall, where is the router, what could be the possible network path between these systems, that kind of understanding. Then you require a risk matrix. This risk matrix comes from the corporate side. It is generally used for corporate risk assessment, but you could also use the same one for your cybersecurity risk assessment as well. It could be a 3x3 matrix, or it's basically a heat map, 3x3, 4x4, 5x5, sometimes 6x6 and 7x7 also. In the context of ICS, you also need to understand what are the safety issues could happen if one of the asset is not working, like a wall. If a solenoid wall is not opening, what could happen? The tank can burst, and when the tank bursts, there could be safety issues for the people working around the area. So that is coming up with something called as process hazard analysis. There are specialists who will do that. They will tell these are the assets, very critical, and if they don't function properly, these are the possible impact that could happen with these systems. It is also known as HAZOP, Hazard and Operability Analysis, or PHAs. Then you gather threat information. What are the threats against that infrastructure that you are assessing, system under consideration? You also need the vulnerability assessment report for that system. Vulnerabilities can be gathered through different ways. It could be a passive vulnerability assessment through your PCAPs, network captures, your logs of the systems, your configuration files, or it could be, if you have a very good asset inventory, you could do it through some online resources available like CV database. You can use make model version number to enumerate the vulnerabilities into these systems. Then you could review and identify the vulnerabilities through a 2-1 based gap assessment, like what are the policy procedure they are having, whether they actually have something implemented or not. So yeah, these are the prerequisites before you start. And then this is the workflow that talks about the risk assessment. You start with system under consideration. As you see, it's called zone and conduit requirement 1. Then you perform initial risk assessment through your existing PHAs, other relevant documents, and also corporate risk metrics. If your risk identified here is more than your tolerable risk, then you get into detailed risk assessment procedure to identify your zone levels, security level target. The findings are then documented, and a specific list of implementation needs to be created. And this list are basically the security countermeasures that you are going to implement for each of these areas in the plant. What do you really need in the asset inventory? At minimum is the name of the asset, what kind of role that asset is playing, what is the criticality. You need firmware, OS, the protocols that these assets are working, IP addresses, and is there an interzone path for accessing that asset? Like a PLC into one system, can it be accessed by another PLC in another system? Is there a requirement for that kind of access? If that access is happening, what kind of protocol that is being used here? Is there an external exposure? Do you have an external requirement? Maybe you are using your PLC in something which is situational awareness, and there are external agencies which might be interested to take that input from using another protocols like OPC or something like a Pi server, if you are heard of. These are some of the requirements typically are associated with getting the information from the field available. Then identifying the procedures. Do you have any access control implemented? May have some multi-factor authentication implemented for giving the external connectivity to the system. You record the sessions, do you record the logs, so on and so forth. Then we need the vulnerabilities, which also could have KEVs, which is non-exploitable vulnerabilities. We also need to check whether we have screenshots, firewall network tables available for us to correlate that information of asset inventory, whether it is correct or not. Threat side, there could be multiple different sources, but generally what we see as a threat for industrial infrastructure, one of them is ransomware. Of course, in the beginning of the discussion, we have seen how they are actually increasing. Then typically these systems are not hardened. There are some living of the land attacks possible, exploiting the valid credentials, the WMI, your RDP pivot from one system to another. It is possible. RDPs are used generally a lot in older systems. Let's say there is substation and there is a control center, possibly they are communicating over RDP. So there could be a challenge. Then we have these protocols which are used. Generally, these protocols are not designed with security in mind. Modbus, DNP3, IC 61850, then IC 104. Those all are the more popular protocols, and none of them are having security being built into them. Then we have supply chain issues. The jump force that you will create to give the access to the supplier, it could also be one of the threat. Sometimes the cloud-based application that are being subscribed by the plant, they could also become the initial attack vector for getting into the facility. So risk matrix looks like this. It is a heat map of different possibilities of likelihood and impact. Likelihood is driven by your threat and vulnerabilities. They start with different names, like it could be very low, likely, possible, unlikely, very likely, or people might call it with different name. They could say low, medium, um, or maybe high, very high, or critical, whatever the way they want to represent it. So yeah, multiple different ways is what you could basically see. When you do a detailed risk assessment, you basically start with calculating the initial risk through threat times vulnerability time consequence. And this is called unmitigated risk. At this moment, you don't consider whatever your existing security countermeasures are. And this is where the initial confusion arises, that somebody might say, oh, malware can come into your system. And then the operations people say, we already have anti-malware solution implemented. How can this come? So this anti-malware is implemented because you anticipated some risk, but now you are methodologically calculating what is that risk. So initially you start with unmitigated risk without considering any of the security countermeasures. Then you recalculate with the countermeasures, and if there is some delta left, that's what will be the outcome of risk assessment exercise. Like the same example, that there is a vulnerability in your power plant, and new threat group has designed a specific malware. There are possibly already some mitigation measures. But then when you have identified a new threat, it is also having your assets possibly getting impacted. Then you would see what is already there, what additional countermeasures you would do. And then you take a decision whether you want to accept this risk, discard that risk, okay, this is not applicable to us, or transfer that risk through uh, uh, buying an insurance or possibly engaging managed service provider or something like that. So this is a detailed procedure. Start with identifying the threats. You create list of threats. Then start with identifying the vulnerabilities, have the list of vulnerabilities, then determine the specific consequence and impact on the impact scale, the unmitigated likelihood without any security countermeasures. Then you determine the security level target here at this point itself. Post security level target identification. If this risk is exceeding your tolerable one, then you consider your existing countermeasures. Post existing countermeasures, you will reevaluate and then see if there is a residual risk left. That residual risk will be then addressed through additionally identified security countermeasures, and then this will become your outcome of the risk assessment exercise. So overall, in the risk assessment exercise, we try to go at the security level target. There are multiple different methods to do that. One of the method which was also prescribed in IEC 62443 earlier is called cyber risk reduction factor. The standard says that you could use different methods, but the cyber risk reduction factor is basically dividing your unmitigated risk with your tolerable risk. It gives you a factor, and then you could map these factors with different security levels, which will then be your security level target. You could also use the same security level definition, like you know that, okay, we have a nuclear power plant, and it might be, of course, a very juicy target for different entities. And that's when you would possibly would like to implement the security level definition based implementation. Or you could do a qualitatively detailed uh, risk assessment based on your maturity of risk assessment capabilities. So we have very less time, but let me quickly show you how do we really do a risk assessment for a simple architecture. Uh, hope my screen is visible. Okay. So yeah, this is a small sample architecture, and this is how your asset inventory will look like. You will have details like the name of the asset, the asset ID, the make, model, version number, different things. And then you could create a data source where you keep the information like what kind of metrics it is, uh, what are you going to use the cyber risk reduction factor. So let me first show you the metrics and then we'll come back here. So here in this example, we are also using a 5x5 matrix, and the tolerable risk here is 5, which is showing into green, and whatever is beyond 5 is non-tolerable. So in the risk reduction factor part, we have put 5 as our tolerable risk, and then we divide with this 5 here. Whatever comes, if your risk is 1, you divide it by 5, CRR becomes 0.2. If your risk is 15, you divide it by 5, CRR becomes 3. And these are your security levels, which simply is 0 to 5. So since it's a 5x5 matrix, each of those are basically addressing 5 of them. From 1 to 5, it's 0. Anything beyond 6 to 10, it is security level 1 as a target, and then so on and so forth. So yeah, whatever is there in the matrix, we have given it a number for our risk assessment exercise. So here is a quick example. And the PLC could have a risk of threat action, somebody getting unauthorized access. And then the vulnerabilities, there is no physical security sufficient. What could happen if somebody gets access to the PLC? They could change the PLC logic, damage the PLC, like physically damaging the PLC. And then we will calculate what are the possible consequence of this activity. And this consequence is again coming from your risk matrix. These are your consequences: safety, environment, financial, and reputation. And then you have different impact, which is starting from very small, minor, to something which is very big. To something which is like 2+ fatalities happening for the people who are working there. So based on that, you calculate these impacts, and whatever is the highest, you only consider that. So in this case, the environmental impact or the safety impact is the measure, and the number assigned to measure is 4 here. So you have considered 4, and then you see what are the possibilities of such a event happening. There is also method to calculate that, but if you're not having a physical security applicable available, then there are very high chance that somebody can actually access your PLC. So we have also considered it as a likely, which is in this case is having the rating of 5. So 5 is your likelihood. Your impact here is 4, and you multiply that, you get 20, which is your risk here. This 20 is then divided by your tolerable risk, which in our case was 5, and that's what you get here. You get security level target as 3. So whatever is defined in the standard, that becomes applicable here for security level 3 for access control requirement is specifically applicable to the PLC. So then you could consider whether you have some existing security countermeasures like physical security for the control rooms. We have log for PLC cabinet, something like that. Then your likelihood will reduce. You still have higher risk. You could say that, okay, we want to put arm guard or CCTV cameras based on the type of organization or the entity. So this is the way that you would do for each and every asset um, in detail. And it is a quite comprehensive exercise, requires a lot of time, a lot of effort. But yeah, this is the methodological way, which is very important before you're starting your journey of cybersecurity uh, implementation for your OT infrastructure. It's a very quick one, but yeah, it's kind of gives you a gist of what happens into risk assessment exercises. Okay, so let me change my screen back to the slides. So yeah, at the end of the risk assessment, you could have multiple different things that you could do. You could do avoidance of the risk by eliminating the risk, implementing security countermeasures. You could reduce the risk by reducing the likelihood of that event happening. Then you could transfer the risk through buying insurance or entering into a contract with the vendor. You accept the risk. Okay, I know this risk is there. I don't want to do anything. I'll just simply write it into risk register, because the security implementation is much higher than the cost of damage that could happen. Or you could share the risk with multiple different entities. If it's a bigger organization, there may be different substations, and then maybe they want to share the risk with different entities, implement that zone boundary security control, so on and so forth. Yeah, so this is about the essential of doing a risk assessment, and also the methodological way of addressing these requirements. So now is the time that I'll try to see some questions and try to answer them. And also we will have a quick quiz, 5 of them based on the slides that we have discussed. So do attempt them. And yeah, there are also a lot of resources, and this Excel sheet is also available online if you want to use it and make it your first risk assessment Excel sheet. It's available. You could download online on the website otcybersecurity.com. Okay, so Humana, shall we start taking the questions now, or are you going to launch the quiz? So I'm taking a question now, which says that is the ACET register the only basis of conducting a risk assessment? No, not only the ACET register, but you need the architecture diagrams. There may be generally too many anomalies. Whatever is listed in the ACET register is not present, and whatever is there in the architecture, they are not present. So you need basically a full-fledged understanding of what actually is there in the field. So ask them the information which is correct and which really represents the plant at the floor. So you need a network architecture diagram. Possibly if you could run a scan, do a passive scan, and then validate their currency of the ACET register that is being there. Okay, so risk assessment is not for new system. Risk assessment have multiple different triggers. Risk assessment is required for new system. Risk assessment is required whenever there is a new threat is identified, whenever you are making a change in the system. It is required as part of your vulnerability assessment or annual audits, or it could also be, your regulatory requirements that you need to do every year. So yeah, it's not a for new systems and design stage. It's a continuous process and defined frequency that the organization would like to do. The risk assessment references are subjective. Are there any minimum requirement required per case? Yeah, it is a challenge. It could become subjective. And one of the good ways you could use something like your MITRE ATT&CK Navigator, MITRE ATT&CK database, which tells what are the possible threats against one infrastructure. And I discussed this in one of the course that I conduct, which is risk assessment workshop, using LLMs to remove that subjectiveness of enumerating the threats. It is very difficult that you remember all of the threats possible, all of the MITRE ATT&CK Navigator techniques possible. So it's better that you use the technologies that are available here, and then accordingly identify the possible threats. Okay. Yeah, so assets are basically a comprehensive list across your enterprise. It is all the assets which are having routable protocols and IP-based protocols, IP-based connectivity. At least all of those assets needs to be enumerated. Yes, air gap systems are also required to do risk assessment. I'm seeing this question by Gulam. Thanks for asking these questions. This is a misnomer. Air gap as a concept is not a security concept. It helps as compensating countermeasures, but you need to do the risk assessment, like what are the other ways your system can be compromised. The Stuxnet example happened in 2010. It actually was an air gap system, so sophisticated, multiple different layers of security was there, but still it was compromised. So we need to see insider threat. We need to see if there is a USB-based attack can come. We need to see if engineering laptops are getting connected. Those kind of things also are part of your risk assessment. And yeah, that's why we need to do air gap systems also. Yeah, so exactly. I see a question by Nazim that sometimes plants are portable systems attached to plant for operation, how to include them in risk assessment and confirm it and to confirm compliance. So when you are creating zones and conduits, all these movable devices, which could be your tablets, your engineering laptops, or other systems that you are connecting temporarily, consider them at one single zone and then do the risk assessment. As the outcome, the security requirement that you will identify for these movable devices will be uniform for all those systems. And that's how you address the security for these movable devices, which are your engineering laptops. Possibly sometimes you use tablets also for accessing some of the systems over web application. In order to be compliant, all security levels are acceptable. Okay, so security levels are based on your risk, and you could choose security levels for your zones. Like the standard is so beautifully designed that it does not say that. Let me take you to this one slide. Yeah, these are 7 foundational pillars in 62443. And these foundational pillars actually talks about different security levels possible under these foundational pillars, like in identification, authentication, control. What would suffice for security level 1? What would suffice for security level 2? So on and so forth. Different level have different requirements. But the standard is so beautiful. It says that, okay, for your plant, access control is very important. So you could choose security level 3 for access control. And then it says that, okay, restricted data flow is not so important for you. You could choose security level 2 for RDF. That's kind of possibilities also there. But mostly people select single security level for all the 7 foundational requirements in the standards, which is like all 7 of them should be complied to security level 3 or security level 2, something like that. Is air gapping with IT environment limited to data diode only, or is it acceptable to have firewall for segmentation and still be compliant to IC? Okay, so IC 62443 standard does not specifically tell you do this, you do that. It says that if your data flow, if your requirement of IT OT connectivity has some certain requirements, then you do implementation based on that risk. If you have really a requirement of sharing some data going in from your OT to IT, implement a data diode. Do you need something coming in from IT to OT? Specifically put some broker service in between and then use that broker service. Don't directly give the access to the OT environment, because your IT services are the one which will get impacted first whenever the attack happens, and then they might pivot towards your OT environment. So you should not create any direct connectivity from your IT to OT. And for that purpose only, selectively you give access to data diodes. Data diodes are also not sacrosanct. It's not like that you put and then your entire security is done. It is also based on a specific environment, a specific use case. Should external dependencies be considered, for instance, reliance on enterprise IT billing? Absolutely, yes. You need to consider, and that's why in risk assessment exercise you need to invite the people from IT security as well. So there is also one more thing, that what are you going to protect? Like Colonial Pipeline, the OT infrastructure was not impacted. There was no attack on OT. It is a typical Indian IT attack, but they were not able to operate it. So yeah, the risk assessment then in this case would primarily be for IT infrastructure, not for OT infrastructure per se. and that's how they're going to protect. The IT side of risk assessment would address this, that the impact on IT could also have impact on operations towards the OT infrastructure. Would Profibus Modbus devices also be subject to risk assessment? And there should be most often not be discoverable through tools via TCP. Yeah, so you could have a passive network assessment of the TCP network if there is a flow, and then if you are using, Modbus over TCP, Modbus RTU, that can be captured, and then you could use it for doing the assessment. But if they are not there, then yeah, you could manually do that, or take an input of the devices or the application which are managing it. You could take information from there and then implement, then include them into asset inventory. But typically these asset inventory tool, Clarity, Nozami, Synex Security, Monitor, they do this activity automatically, and you could use that information for asset inventory. Okay. Yeah, there is one more question by Yasmin about subjectivity. Yes, it might have that subjectivity, and that's why you need a good knowledge base and use the automation for enumerating your threats, enumerating your assets to simplify the work and reduce the subjectivity. Okay, so we are end of time. Umana, did you launch the quiz? You are muted. I'm not able to hear.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, the quiz will be launched after I shut down this session. I will give the instruction to the participant on it.
All right. No problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mubarik and Shiv, for an informative session. It was a pleasure listening to you both.